The title of this lesson is Special Products. In mathematics, to find the product means to multiply. In this lesson, we shall learn shortcuts for multiplying two special types of binomials. The shortcuts are very different, so I have divided this tape into two lessons. The lessons are the product of conjugates and square of a binomial. A blue screen will appear before the product of conjugates lesson, then the title, the product of conjugates. Next, I shall teach you how to recognize conjugates and the shortcuts for multiplying conjugates. Then I shall work these problems. X plus 2 times x minus 2 down through 2x plus 5y times 2x minus 5y. After we complete the conjugate lesson, a black screen will appear. The title, Square of a Binomial, will appear. Then I shall discuss what we mean by the square of a binomial and how to use shortcuts when squaring a binomial. Next, I shall work these problems. I shall finish the lesson with this problem that involves squaring a binomial in the process of finding the product of conjugates. Let's begin with the blue screen and the conjugate lesson. The product of conjugates. The instructions or directions for a problem might say, perform the indicated operation. Let's look at a typical problem. The indicated operation is multiplication. We are multiplying binomials, but let's look at these binomials. Notice the first term is the same. The second terms are opposites. On this problem, the first terms are the same. The second terms are opposites. We are multiplying binomial conjugates. Two binomials that have the same first term and opposite last terms are called binomial conjugates. Now, when we multiply these out, we can FOIL them out. We will say x times x is x squared. We will say x times 4 is positive 4x. Negative 4 times x is negative 4x. Negative 4 times positive 4 is negative 16. Notice what happens. We have our x squared. 4x, subtract 4x will cancel. We are left with minus 16. We are left with x times x, or x squared. Subtract 4 times 4, or 16. Please note the inner and outer term have opposite signs. That's because these last terms have opposite signs. Now, let's FOIL out this second product. 6y times 6y is 36y squared. For outers, 6y times negative 5 is negative 30y. For inners, 5 times 6y is positive 30y. For last, 5 times negative 5 is negative 25. We have 36y squared. Once again, minus 30y cancels positive 30y. We are left with minus 25. 36y squared. 6y times 6y, subtract the 5 times 5. Our answers were x squared minus 16, 36y squared subtract 25. The product of binomial conjugates is the difference of two squares. Difference in mathematics, we mean subtract. This first term is a quantity squared. It is x squared. This term is 4 squared. This term is 6y squared. This term is 5 squared. Let's look at the rule for multiplying binomial conjugates. The product of conjugates. In words, we say the product of conjugates is the square of the first term, subtract the square of the second term. If you prefer, you may say the square of the first term minus the square of the second term. In symbols, if we want to multiply a plus b times a minus b, we will square the a, subtract the b squared. Now let's rework those two problems, not using FOIL, but using the shortcuts. The shortcut would tell us, since we are multiplying binomial conjugates, that we will square the x, subtract the 4 squared, which would be x squared subtract 16. For the other problem, we will square the first term, 6y squared, subtract 5 squared. 6y squared is 36y squared, subtract 25. Let's work some problems. Here is a list of the problems I shall work in the Product of Conjugates lesson. The product of conjugates. Perform the indicated operation. The indicated operation is multiplication. I notice that I am multiplying binomial conjugates, so I know that I may square the first term, subtract the square of the second term. I will have x squared subtract 2 squared, which is 4. Next, 3x subtract 7 times 3x plus 7. I am multiplying binomial conjugates, same first term, opposite second terms. I may square the first term, subtract the square of the second term. 3x squared is 9x squared, subtract 7 squared is 49. Notice in each case I am getting the difference of 2 squares. Next problem. Same first term, opposite second terms. I will square the first term, subtract the square of the second term. 1 squared is 1, subtract 4x squared is 16x squared. 5x minus 6y times 5x plus 6y. Same first term, opposite second terms. I will square the first term, subtract the square of the second term. Any time that you can mentally do this second step, I encourage you to do that. 5x squared would be 25x squared. Subtract 6y squared would be 36y squared. For the next problem, looks a little more complicated, but I notice same first term, opposite second terms. I am multiplying binomial conjugates, so I square the first term. The first term is z squared, so I will have z squared squared. Subtract. The second term squared would be x squared squared. Z squared squared would give me z to the 4th. Subtract x squared squared would give me x to the 4th. Next problem, fractions. Same first term, opposite second term. So I will square the first term, subtract, I will square the second term. When I square 1/3 x, I will get 1/9 x squared. Subtract, when I square 1/2 y, I get 1/4 y squared. I would like for you to work these last two problems. After you have worked them, I shall work the problems so you may check your work. Now please pause the tape and work the problems. How did you do? Did you get x squared minus 64 for one answer and 4x squared minus 25y squared for the other answer? Let's work the problems. X minus 8 times x plus 8, I square the first term, subtract 8 squared. I will get x squared, subtract 64. For this last problem, same first term, opposite second terms, I will square the first term, subtract the square of the second term. 2x squared is 4x squared, subtract the 5y squared is 25y squared. That completes the product of conjugates lesson. Let's move on to the square of a binomial lesson. Square of a binomial. What do we mean by the square of a binomial? Let's look at some problems. Perform the indicated operation. We have a binomial, x plus 4, raised to the second power. When we raise something to the second power, it means to square it. We write x plus 4 times x plus 4. To multiply two binomials, we may use the full method. We will say x times x is x squared. We will say x times 4 is 4x. We will say 4 times x is 4x. And last, we will say 4 times 4 is 16. Combining like terms, we get x squared plus 4x will give us 8x plus 16. I'd like for you to notice when we squared the binomial, the result was a trinomial. Now let's look at each term. To get the x squared, we said x times x. Or, looking at this problem, if we had taken this first term and squared it, we would have gotten x squared. To get the 8x, we took the result of multiplying the outer terms, which is 4x, and we added it to the result of multiplying the inner terms, which is 4x. Notice we got the same thing when we multiplied the outer terms and the inner terms. We said 4x plus 4x is 8x. We had two of the same terms. To get the outer term or the inner term, we could have multiplied this first term times this second term. X times 4 is 4x. Since we know we have two of the same terms, we could have said 2 times 4x to get 8x. Or we could think we could double x times 4 to get 8x. To get the 16, we said 4 times 4. Or we could have looked at this 4 and squared this 4 to get the 16. Now let's work the second problem. 2x minus 5 squared means 2x minus 5 times 2x minus 5. Using the full method, multiplying first terms, we will say 2x times 2x and get 4x squared. Multiplying outer terms, we will say 2x times negative 5 and get negative 10x. Multiplying inner terms, we will say negative 5 times 2x is negative 10x. And last, negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25. Combining like terms, we have the 4x squared minus 10x will give us minus 20x, and then we will have the 25. Once again, when we squared the binomial, the result was a trinomial. Now let's look at these terms. To get the 4x squared, we said 2x times 2x. Looking at the beginning of the problem, we could have taken the 2x and we could have squared the 2x to get the 4x squared. To get the minus 20x, we said minus 10x minus 10x. Notice the result of multiplying the outer terms is equal to the result of multiplying the inner terms once again. We have two of the same terms. To get either the inner or the outer term, we could multiply 2x times minus 5. That would give us minus 10x. And because we have two of the same term, we could say 2 times minus 10x to give us minus 20x. Or we could double minus 10x to give us minus 20x. For the 25, we said negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25. Or we could have looked at this 5. We could have squared the 5 to get the positive 25. Now I'd like for you to notice something. The first term on each of these results is positive. The last term on each of these results is positive. We were saying positive 4 times positive 4 to give us a positive 16. Even though this sign was negative, we said negative 5 times negative 5, which gives us a positive 25. Now look at your middle terms. My middle term for my first problem was positive because I was adding a positive 4x to a positive 4x. I could determine the sign of the middle term by determining what the outer result or the inner result would be by saying x times 4 is a positive 4x, so I know that my outer and inner term results will both be positive. For this second problem, my middle term is negative because I combined a negative 10x with a negative 10x. Notice I could determine the sign of my middle term by saying positive 2x times negative 5 will give me a negative 10x, since I know that my outer result of multiplying terms is negative 10x and my inner result of multiplying terms is negative 10x. Then when I add those two negative numbers, the result will be negative. Now, let's talk about the shortcuts. What if I did not want to FOIL this out? In words, to square a binomial, I could square the first term. I could double the product of the first and second term. I could multiply the first and second term and then multiply that by 2. That's what we do when we double. And last, I could square the second term. In symbols, if I have a plus b squared, I square the a. I say 2 times the product of a and b, and then I square the b. Now let's rework those problems and let's use the shortcut. If I want to square x plus 4, I square the first term. I'll get the sign for the middle term by saying a positive times a positive. In other words, a positive x times a positive 4 will give me a positive result, so my middle term is positive. I know I want to double, so I will multiply by 2, and then I will multiply by my first term and then my 4. For my last term, I will square the 4. I will have x squared plus 2 times x times 4, which is 8x, plus 4 squared, which is 16. Now, anytime you can skip this middle step, I encourage you to do so. Think in your head, square the x squared. 2 times x times 4 will give me 8x for my middle term, and then square the 4 to get the 16. That's what we're working toward, is being able to look at this problem and write down these 3 terms as the answer. When we square 2x minus 5, we will square the first term. We will get the sign of the middle term by saying a positive times a negative will give me a negative. I know I need to double, so I will multiply by 2. I will multiply 2 times the first term, which is 2x times the 5. And last, I will square the 5. When I square the 2x, the result is 4x squared minus 2 times 2x is 4x. 4x times 5 will give me 20x. And last, when I square the 5, I get 25. Please notice, x squared plus 8x plus 16, x squared plus 8x plus 16. The result, 4x squared minus 20x plus 25, 4x squared minus 20x plus 25. Now, let's work some problems using the shortcuts. Here is a list of the problems I shall work to complete the square of a binomial lesson. Perform the indicated operation. We are squaring a binomial. We will square the first term, x squared. Let's get the sign of the middle term. A positive times a positive will give us a positive. We want to say 2 times the first term x times the second term 8, and last we want to square the 8. The result is x squared plus 16x plus 64. When we say 2 times x times 8, we get 16x. When we square the 8, we get 64. At any time that you can skip writing down this middle step, then do so. We want to work toward being able to look at this problem and knowing that these are the 3 terms in the answer. For the next problem, we are squaring 2, subtract 3x. We will square the 2. We will get the sign for the middle term. A positive times a negative will give us a negative. We want to say 2 times the first term, which is 2, times the 3x. Last, we need to square the 3x. When we square the 2, we get a 4. Subtract 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 3x is 12x. And last, we will square the 3x to get 9x squared. Let's rewrite that answer as 9x squared subtract 12x plus 4. For the next problem, we are squaring 6x plus y. We will square the first term. The sign of the middle term is positive because a positive times a positive will give us a positive. We will say 2 times the first term 6x times the second term y, plus we will square the y. When we square the 6x, we get 36x squared. For the middle term, we'll say 2 times 6x is 12x. 12x times y will give us 12xy. And last, we will write y squared. For this problem, let's work it without writing the middle step. Let's square the first term. X squared is simply x squared. For the middle term, a positive times a negative will give us a negative. We may think 2 times x times 4 will give us 8x. And for the last term, we will square the 4. 4 squared is 16. If you prefer for the middle term, you may say x times negative 4 gives you a negative 4x. And when we double negative 4x or multiply negative 4x by 2, the result is a negative 8x. For this problem, we are squaring a binomial. Let's square the first term. We will have 2x squared. For the middle term, a positive times a negative will give us a negative. We will say 2 times the first term, which is 2x, times the 7y. And last, we will square the 7y. When we square the 2x, we get 4x squared. For the middle term, 2 times 2x is 4x. 4x times 7y will give us 28xy. And for the last term, when we square the 7y, the result is 49y squared. For the next problem, we are squaring 1/5 x plus 2/3 y. We will square the 1/5 x. We will get the sign of the middle term. A positive times a positive is positive. We need to multiply 2 times 1/5 x times 2/3 y. Since we are multiplying fractions, let's write the 2 as a fraction as 2 over 1. We will multiply by 1/5 x and 2/3 y. Last, we will square the 2/3 y. When we square 1/5 x, we get 1/25 times x squared. For the middle term, when we multiply 2 times 1/5 times 2/3, for the numerator, we'll say 2 times 1 times 2 is 4. For the denominator, we'll say 1 times 5 times 3 is 15. And then we will multiply x times y. And for the last term, when we square 2/3 y, we will get 4/9 y squared. I would like for you to work these last 2 problems. After you have worked them, I shall work the problems so you can check your work. Now please pause the tape and work the problems. How did you do? Let's work these problems. For the first one, I will not write down the middle step. I will square the 3. 3 squared is 9. I will get the sign for the middle term. A positive times a positive is a positive. I will say 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times x is 6x for my middle term. And last, I will square the x. Rewriting those terms, I will have x squared plus 6x plus 9. When I square the 4x minus 3y, I will square the 4x. The sign of the middle term is negative because a positive times a negative will give us a negative. I will say 2 times 4x times 3y, and last I will square the 3y. When I square the 4x, I get 16x squared. Subtract 2 times 4x is 8x. 8x times 3y will give me 24xy. And last, when I square the 3y, I get 9y squared. I would like to complete this tape by finding the product of a conjugate that involves squaring a binomial. Perform the indicated operation. What is the indicated operation? I have brackets. Inside these brackets, I have x plus 2 subtract 3. I have another pair of brackets, and inside the second pair of brackets, I have x plus 2 plus 3. Notice x plus 2, the same thing. Minus 3 plus 3, opposites. Earlier in this lesson, we learned to multiply a plus b times a minus b. When the first terms are the same and the second terms are opposites, we say we're multiplying conjugates. That's what we're doing in this problem. The x plus 2's are the same and the 3's are opposites. We are multiplying conjugates. When we multiply conjugates, we know that we square the first term, subtract the square of the second term. We square the a, subtract the square of the b. So for this problem, we will square the x plus 2, subtract the square of the 3. Now let's use our shortcut for squaring this binomial. We will square the first term. When we square x, we get x squared. We will think 2 times x times 2 is 4x, so our second term will be 4x. Last, we will square the 2. When we square the 2, we will get 4. And then we need to subtract our 3 squared. 3 squared is 9. We will combine like terms. We will write the x squared, then the 4x. 4 subtract 9 will give us a minus 5. That completes the special products lesson. Please rewind the tape before you return it. Thank you.